In the wintertime, we have a lot of people that tell us they struggle to catch fish because they don't know where to go. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about fishing tidal creeks and tidal rivers in the backcountry. And if you have any questions on this, this should point you in the right direction on how to catch some fish. So let's get right into it. Now, what happens in the wintertime is these fish are actually going to move in from those open bays and the inlets, and they go to the backcountry for a number of reasons. But the two biggest ones is they're looking for stable water temperatures. They're looking for a little bit of more warmth, and they're also looking for their food source. For the most part, the water temperature is not as important as that food source. They really want to get fed, and that's where the food source is going to be, so that's why they move up there. Now, in this video, I'm going to talk about the two main species that we're fishing for inshore in these backcountries, and that's going to be redfish and it's going to be trout, because I fish for these differently at different times of the tide cycle and in different locations, so we're going to break that down. If you're only interested in trout, you can fast forward to the second half of this video. That's where I'm going to be talking about trout. We're going to start with redfish, so let's get right into it. So when it comes to fishing these tidal creeks and these tidal rivers and redfish, the best places that I find are the creeks that almost drain completely out during a low tide cycle. And the reason why is it concentrates the fish. Now, during the higher tide cycles, you can go catch redfish. Don't get me wrong, they do feed, but the problem is the more water there is, the more they're going to spread out and it gets harder to find them. So whenever you have a low tide situation, especially a negative low tide situation, it really concentrates those fish up. So specifically the types of areas are whenever that creek is pretty much going to be emptied out. Maybe it only has about 12 inches of water, maybe 2 feet of water, especially in the a hole of a bend of a creek where it's got shallow water or maybe even no water on either side of it, and it kind of traps them in there. It really can be like fishing in a barrel. These are the places that I'm looking for. And bonus points if it has hard structure, so something like a dock with dock pilings or rocks or oysters, something that can soak in that sun whenever that water moves out. It's going to heat up those hard structures, and then when the water moves back in, that's going to make that water just a little bit warmer than the surrounding area, and fish will be attracted to that. Now, what's going to happen during the higher tide parts? So say after that first part of that 1/3 of the incoming, and there gets to be more water in there, then the fish are going to move back up in the grass. The redfish specifically are going to move back up in the grass, and they're going to be a little bit harder to find. Now, you can get them on the top part of a tide during high tide, but they're going to be up in the grass flats. If you know of an area, if you have a vessel or a place that you can get out of your boat and wade, you can still catch fish, but it's more of a thing that you have to know where these fish are going to go in order to locate them. That's why at a lower tide, they're easier to catch. Now, as far as what lures and baits to use in the wintertime, shrimp is king. That is going to be the food source that's back up in the backcountry, and especially for redfish, that's what they're going to be milling around trying to go after. So artificial shrimps, if that's what you're looking for, an artificial lure, a small shrimp like our prawn junior, a 3.5-inch shrimp, works excellent on these fish. Or what I call the do nothing lure, which is our tweaker. There's nothing to it. It's a finesse rig. It's kind of a straight action. That crawled slowly on the bottom is excellent in the wintertime. I've caught a lot of fish this way. But if you're a live bait angler, then obviously you want to try shrimp. Shrimp is going to work. Everything eats a shrimp, and especially in the wintertime, it's tough to beat a shrimp. Now, as far as the equipment, when it comes to rod and reels, lines, leaders, I use standard inshore stuff. So a 7-foot to 7.5-foot medium power fast action rod with a 2,500 to 3,000 sized reel with 10-pound braid, and I'm going to go with 20-pound leader. A lot of times in open flats in the wintertime, because the water's clear, I'll drop down to my leader size, but in this situation, especially if we're fishing around docks and rocks and oysters and things that can break me off, I'm going to stick with at least a 20-pound leader. Now let's move on over to trout. We're going to talk about the same things, where to find them, when's the best time to fish for them, the lures and the equipment. So let's get right into it. So trout are a little bit different than redfish. They like that deeper water because they're ambush predators. They typically feed upwards, so they're always looking up for their meals, and they like current, whereas a redfish, they're scavengers. They don't need the current. They feed well during slack tide, but trout, they really like that water movement, so something to consider when it comes to timing. Now, as far as location goes, the best places to look are those creeks that even at low tide are going to have at least about 6 feet of water or more. Again, because these fish are predatory type of fish and they're looking to feed upwards, they like that deeper water. Now, the best place to look for these are going to be the deeper bends of the creeks, and you can find these a lot of times by looking at the sharpest bend. When the bend is the sharpest in a creek, typically those are going to be deeper places, and that's where a lot of your trout are going to stack up. And if you can combine that with a drain that's coming out of the marsh that runs right into the deep end of the creek, these are great places to look, and trout can really stack up in there, and you can have one of those banner days if you find a spot like this. Another great place to look for trout are your deeper drains that drain out of the marsh that goes right into the main creek or the main river. And the reason why is as this water flows out, it creates a little bit of a pond, a little bit of a puddle underneath there, and it's a slightly deeper area than the rest of it, so it's another piece of structure. So you've got the drain that's delivering the food, that's delivering that shrimp and whatever's in the backcountry being flushed out, combined with the extra structure of having that little deeper pocket. So these are great places also. Now let's talk about the best times to fish for trout. Because trout like current and they like having that extra water, I like fishing for them whenever the tide is at its highest. So whenever you get that last part of that incoming tide or the first part of that outgoing tide, it seems to be the best bite for your trout. Now when it comes to slack tide, trout really like current because they're ambush predators. They don't feed very well during slack tide. Not saying that you can't catch them in slack time, but your best times are going to be whenever that water's moving. So the higher parts of the tide cycle are typically the best time for trout. Now you're going to fish them differently depending on if it's pre-cold front or post-cold front. If it's after a cold front that just went through and that water temperature is starting to drop, you get a high pressure that moves in. So with that falling water temperature and also the high pressure, it's going to force those trout to the bottom. So you want to make sure and fish towards the bottom. Now, if it's post cold front and it's a couple of days after and that water starts to warm up, you're on a warming trend, then those fish are going to move higher up in the water column. So you want to make sure and fish lures that are going to be right in their face or just above them. So as the water temperature is falling during a cooling phase, you want to fish right on the bottom. So a small shrimp imitation put on a jig head or even a live shrimp put on a jig head is going to be the way to go. And make sure and move it really, really slowly. Now, as those fish move up in the water column, when the water warms up, then you want to make sure and use lures that are going to be higher in the water column. So something like a suspending twitch bait or even a slowly sinking twitch bait like the flea flicker or a paddle tail put on a jig head, count down to a certain depth and then retrieved in, is a great option when it comes to trout during a warming trend. So make sure and pay attention to what that water temperature is doing. If it's on a cooling trend, then you want to fish on the bottom. If it's on a warming trend, then you want to move up off of the bottom. Now, when it comes to the equipment to use, I still like using that 7 to 7.5 foot rod with a 2500 size reel, but I like using a medium light power. With slot size trout, you can get away with it, and I like using as light a setup as possible. And what I mean by light is actually mean how much it weighs. With a lighter setup, it's typically going to be more sensitive and you're going to be able to feel those light bites. In the wintertime, especially during a cooling trend, those bites can be really, really light, and a heavy setup, meaning something that weighs a lot, is not as sensitive and you can miss a lot of these bites. So a lighter setup will help you out when it comes to trout fishing in the wintertime. Now, as far as mainline, I'll actually drop down to 5 to 8 pound mainline braid, and then I'll put 10 to 15 pound leader, monofilament leader, because in the wintertime, this water will get cleaner and these trout have really good vision. They're going to be able to see that and they're going to be able to sense that. So going down in your line and leader size will get you more bites. Now, I know that was a lot to digest, but I want to make sure you have the information to get you started in the right direction when it comes to fishing these tidal creeks in the backcountry. And anybody out there, if you want to share a tip or tactic that you use that helps you catch fish in the wintertime, put them down in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you have any specific questions about the techniques covered in this video and you want to go more in depth with it, we have videos that will help you out, answer any of your questions. When it comes to lure selection or how to work a lure, how to tie knots, anything from basic to advanced, we can help you out. So make sure to check us out at the Insider Club at saltstrong.com. Well, I hope this video helped you out and answer some questions you might have, and I really do appreciate you watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Have a great day. Bye.